Today's guest is Karen Højmark. She is Chief Operating Officer at AskCody, a software company who makes a meeting management platform on a Microsoft suite. They are around 45 employees with offices in Denmark and US and are heavily backed by Promentum Equity Partners and the Danish Growth Fund. But despite growing fast, Karen insists on doing it without any HR department. So that's today's topic, how to run an HR-less organization. I'm your host, I'm Søren Vaso Hansen, and this is People Led. Hey Karen, welcome to People Led.
Thank you.
So before we get going on why to run an HR-less organization, could you just give us a bit of who you are and what you do here at AskCody?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always good to be in a position where I need to explain what I do and why I do it. It increases the reflection. I work with culture and collaboration, if I should break it down, and everything in between. So I usually say that I am not the one owning culture, and I'm not the one owning collaboration. That there are things that we need to look at in a intersubjective perspective. But in the end, I am the main responsible. So I need to make sure that we do all the things necessary in order to have a well-functioning culture and well-functioning collaboration. I'm also responsible for the main part of the business administration. That hopefully should enable my colleagues to be able to do what they do best by taking a lot of things off their desk.
All right, cool. So what kind of stuff could that be that you remove from your people's desks?
Everything of legal character, for instance, contracts. I work with finance about taxes, payrolls, benefits, everything. What is possible, what's not possible. Legislation, could we hire someone in that way? What does the legislation say about that? What's the difference between what we do here and what we do in America, and so on. It could also be simple things as cultural days. When we do things together, that's also beneficial for each and every one of my colleagues, and removing things from their desk, making sure that everyone is content and hopefully more. Yeah. Making sure that all of the benefits are up rolling, insurances, pension, food, not to forget, and everything in between. Or rental, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I'm hearing a lot of human resource stuff in that, and the topic that we are discussing today is how to run an HR-less organization. So could you put a bit of words on what is that to you? How are you running an HR-less organization?
Well, first of all, we don't have anyone named or titled as HR. So it starts there, or maybe that's just a symptom of, I don't know, what came first.
Yeah.
HR, in my opinion, has the later years changed into something that everybody thinks they know, but no one really knows what is. So HR is human resources, and that is a very wide rhetorical phrase, but it's also very determining. So it's something to do with human beings, and it's something to do with resources. So far, so good. It actually has focus on the person, the human being, the one hired, being the fully person, not just being a role. And it also taps into one of my favorite words as well, something to do with behavior, something that we do instead of who we are. So it actually has the nice hybrid of who we are and what we do.
Yeah.
The challenging thing here is that it's been put into a separate box, which I have a hard time grasping. Because if we wanna work with people, if I want colleagues that are not robots but actually people, they are hired for what they are and mostly for what they do. It should be important for everyone, and especially the nearest leader, to know what is particularly special about this colleague and what is particularly special about this colleague. And putting everything special about that person into a box that's been hidden away, in our case downstairs it would be, where we keep the business administration, and then expect that the closest leader would be able to actually act on important knowledge without important knowledge is, for me, a calculation that will never add up.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if HR is this weird animal, this hybrid of stuff of who we are and what we do, how do you tackle that when you don't have HR? Is that just something that falls out of just being here and doing what you do, or how do you see that?
Well, I think it can sound very modern that we just took a decision to say, well, we don't want HR, and then it is part of our profile. It is actually no such thing. We look at it the other way around. When has it ever occurred that we needed HR? And at this point, never. So our perspective is, if you think you need HR, there are important questions you need to ask yourself. Why do you need HR? What is it that you need HR for? Yeah. Isn't it things, your requests, couldn't you use it, or couldn't you get it in another way? Yeah. So maybe the real question is, what actually happens in companies when HR actually develops? Why does it even happen? Yeah. What is the nature of that?
Why do you think it does that?
It is difficult for me to find a diagnose, and I'm not even capable of such. But in my mind, I think there are different ways that we could actually get challenged. I think on one side, there can always be a problem where the person acting the leadership hasn't got a genuine interest in one's colleagues. And that is obviously a problem that the executives should take into consideration, And the other part, which I see, which I also act on very actively with my colleagues, is fear, anxiety, fright of the unknown. And that is that's a wonderful thing, because that we can work with. The other thing is a bit more difficult. We can also work with it, but it usually gets a bit more deterministic than that. Yeah. But we can work with the anxiety part. So if it actually comes up that someone needs HR, and the natural thing would be, we're going to hire an HR to deal with that kind. The good question is just why? Yeah. What is it you're afraid of? So a thought case, you're the leader, or you're acting leadership towards a colleague, and your instant thought is, I'm in lack of an HR. It would be much more interesting, both for your colleague, for the organization, but also for your personal leadership development, to actually discover that feeling. Yeah. What is happening with you? What is actually going on? what is causing this fear or anxiety. I bet a lot of the things that you're experiencing right now as a leader are things that other people put into words prior in time. We could actually dig into modeling this sensation and figuring out how do we act in a very I'm gonna say helpful, but maybe that's not what I mean, but act in a resourceful way maybe towards your colleague.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, sure, totally. But this, so now we're talking about HR of this almost modeling of the employee of the one-on-one conversation and stuff like. If you have a leader who is not fully capable of actually leading your people and spotting those trends in them, so that's one thing of the HR role and what that actually does. But I guess that HR is a lot more today, especially if you go up in the organization, the bigger organization, where it's almost this structural layer upon the organization of saying hiring and onboarding and training people. So is that also a leadership job in your case?
I would definitely say so. There is nothing wrong with having a supporting role in an organization, but that is what it should be and always must be, supporting. Yeah. Because if I take my colleague Steve, for instance, if we're recruiting someone for his team, it's important for me to recruit for a match. That's one thing. He needs to be involved in the process. I can't possibly see how it would function if he's not involved in every decision. He also needs to know how to onboard his colleagues. If everything is just on a pseudo basis in HR, I fear that the authenticity leaves a lot to wish for. Yeah.
All right. So when you're growing right now, you are hiring a lot of people. You are 45 now in Aalborg in Boston, US. Is that something that you help leaders scope up their time of saying now you actually need to make room for hiring and onboarding and all those things that you actually need to do whenever you're growing as fast as you are?
Well, it's as everything else we do, as everything else I do with all of the leaders in the company, it is a dynamic process. So maybe from a strategic point of view, I know what we need, but if I haven't been able to communicate that to my closest colleagues, well, then I'm the one who's not doing my job right. Yeah. So hopefully it should never be a surprise to them what we're in need of, and then it's my job to constantly be that one breathing in their neck, making them take into consideration whether they need someone with that set of knowledge or skills, or what kind of job description the person would actually need when hired, and so on. I wouldn't actually be able to do that on my own. Oh. So then it would be, if I was doing that on my own, I'm thinking the sales team. So 2 months ago, my colleague told me this. So maybe that's a static thing, and I'm just gonna go with that. It becomes the pseudo box again, and that's where it's in lack of the non-cohesiveness. Yeah. Okay.
So whenever we're talking about on the podcast, we are exploring people-led. So that sense of how do you actually get your people to take ownership and distribute that ownership across the organization and go from bottom up. I guess that whenever you're excluding HR from that equation, and you're saying now it's the leader's job to onboard and to recruit and all that stuff, do you think that it makes it easier to run a people-led culture instead of having this fragmented situation where you actually are going into different departments to touch people and go all the way around?
I would think so, and that is what I'm going with at this point. Yeah. And I think there is a crucial thing that strikes me when you say like that, because the funny thing is we never excluded HR. We just didn't find the need to include it.
Yeah.
And that is a significant detail that might do all the difference.
Yeah.
Because we're taking ownership of every struggle, every fear, every anxiety. We're talking a lot about life proficiency, and if we're talking about life proficiency with every colleague, we need to practice ourselves. It's become part of our culture that if we want an organization based on trust, or maybe not based on trust, but strong on trust, it needs to go around the whole organization.
Yeah.
It's difficult to act in trust if I don't trust the closest leaders with the job that's actually theirs.
Yeah. So you don't want to appoint yourself as owner of culture, but are you the guardrails that is making sure that whenever the leaders in your team is going to recruit and have the right people on board, mm-hmm. how are you matching your culture?
Well, just like I'm part of recruitment.
Yeah.
And I'm also in the end responsible for good recruitment, and that is just the whole point. No one is solo responsible. No one is solo driving. It's something that we do together. With the knowledge of the need of each other, that I can't do anything without my colleagues.
Yeah.
And my colleagues also need me. So it's a dynamic process. And sorry, I forgot the question.
It's just this: whenever you need to have this culture fit of a new employee. Mm-hmm. You are seeing a lot more hires because you're part of the team, and it's this collaborative process. So how are you making sure that do you put up guardrails and saying this is what we're looking for in the frames, or are the leaders strong enough to do that?
Well, yes and no. If I did my job right with the leaders as well, I don't need to, because they buy into the same narrative. Yeah. About the same journey as I do. And if they don't, well, I need to point the finger at myself. Yeah. Again, because then I didn't do my job right. It's not that I decide what is the right thing to do, but if we disagree, there are definitely a number of questions that I need to ask them, but also need to ask myself. Okay. Where did we go wrong?
Yeah.
We have a very open dialogue here. We talk, the conversation you and I have right now, there is nothing odd about that conversation with my colleagues. We have, I facilitated things like Socratic dialogue, protreptic sessions where we actually go in and act on different words, try and go around fears that are moving inside of each of us. Every colleague with different needs. So when I recruit alongside with my colleagues, we recruit for a team overall, but we also recruit for small subcultures within the house, and I also recruit for leadership matches. So we have said goodbye to many very, very well qualified people, which we didn't find a match for the company or for the specific leader.
Yeah.
At the moment.
Okay. So what is a subculture? Could you put a words on that?
I think it's important that we acknowledge that everything can't be coherent or cohesive or all hands on one. Maybe that's the wrong phrasing. With growing pains and getting bigger, it would be deceiving ourselves if we thought that everyone did everything the same way.
Yeah.
There is definitely a difference between how the engineers collaborate and how the revenue team collaborates, how they interact with each other, but also the work culture or environment that they own on a daily basis. If we pretend that we're all alike and that it's the same thing working with developing software as it's the same thing selling software, I think we go wrong.
Yeah.
So again, the whole open conversation about the difference of things. What do we see? What do we detect as being relevant? And that obviously creates subcultures. Some people are sitting next to each other every day. I also have, even though we try to practice a bit hot desking, we often end up sitting next to the same people.
Yeah.
And I also have a subculture around the people that I spend the most working hours with, because that is just what happens in culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So how are you managing culture between, you have a distance between the offices here in Aalborg and in Boston. So is that a challenge?
Yes.
I could imagine, but in the topic of HR, would that be of assistance whenever you're having this? You have no organ that is put together just to take care of people, but you're distributing that ownership to a lot of people instead.
Well, I would say one of the main challenges of that is the cultural difference between Europe and the US. I've also learned during the last period of time it is in fact a challenge, but it's not more of a challenge than what I bring life to. So what you give life is what gets life. And I need to attack the challenge with the thought of it being unproblematic, and thinking, so what do we do here in order to have both a cohesive business, but also with room for the subculture, because they also have a subculture in the Boston office, and that is perfectly fine. We just need to be able to address it and figure out when do we need more of it, when do we need less of it, in the same way that we do with the developers and the revenue team in Denmark and the administration team in Denmark. What do we need more of and what do we need less of?
Yeah. All right. So you already gave some angles on how you actually do this, how it works in day-to-day life and stuff like that. But what's your biggest task around? I don't know if you can frame it, because it's me who is putting this perspective on it. But when you don't have an HR organization, what does that change in your daily job? What is the biggest task that you have to cover because you don't have HR?
It is difficult for me to answer, because at the job in AskCody and the way we do it in AskCody, it has been like that since I've had the responsibility. Could you ask me again?
Yeah. So what I'm looking for is saying, if another leader out there is saying this HR and the wise word coming out of you is making sense, and we want to go in this direction as well, what are they going to discover that's on their plate instead of their daily jobs? Is there another task that is unforeseen right now for those who don't practice this?
For a good leader, or for one who's practicing good leadership, no differences at all.
Okay.
For people who are practicing more fragile leadership, I'm guessing it would be a big difference. Because there is no one to push the delicate tasks to. There is no one to leave the troubles with. You need to deal with everything yourself.
Yeah.
So I would say maybe that distinction for the well prepared, the well qualified leader, and that is also what I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
With my colleagues, it's not an issue. Each and every one of my colleagues who possesses a leadership responsibility, they've never expressed it as a problem. On the contrary, they actually want an open dialogue about it and find it a bit freeing, I think.
Yeah. So it's not. Is it something that comes up in job interviews? Like you want to hire a new leader and you're mentioning, well, we don't have any HR. Is that something comes up?
I don't think so, because it is the funny thing about us talking about it right now is making it a thing, but it's just never been a thing.
No, it's me putting a construct on.
Yeah,
top
exactly,
of this.
and it makes good sense, and I've also talked about it before, but in our daily life, it is not a thing.
Yeah.
So I have been very, in job interviews, I've been very specific about what has been expected, what is the journey we're on, what is my structure and my way of looking at things, and what are my virtues. But I've also been very strict about, or very clear about, that they don't need to accept or buy into my virtues. They can actually bring their own to the table, and then hopefully we will co-join it into a set of common values.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm actually experiencing on a daily basis, that when I'm working with one colleague or one leader, we have our own set of values, and then with the next one, there's a bit difference in it, and that is the wonderful thing about working with people, that if you actually sit back and take your time to notice what is the difference between us, and what can we each bring to the table, you can actually lucrate from it. You know?
Can you continue this this construct I'm putting on top of it with Notes HR? How long can you continue this as you grow?
In my opinion, we need to continue this ongoing. I don't see an end date to it. I still I think, again, I want to enhance business administration is a very important part of business.
Yeah. Very important part of business.
So that one needs to be good, needs to be well functioning. It's important that there are enough people working with business administration, so that it would never be an issue for the single leader in question. But if we're continuously good to always hire good people, and I don't mean that there are good people, bad people, but people who actually buy into the strategy.
Yeah, good fits.
Good fits, exactly. Well, again, my question remains, why would we ever need HR?
All right. I think that's the final note from this show. Mm-hmm. All right. Pleasure to have you on, Karen, and good luck growing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Cheers.
Mm-hmm.